another video on this channel. If you're new here, hey, hi, my name is Lillian and I like to talk about books. Today I wanted to do the end of the year book tag, which was originally created by Ariel Bissett. I will link her channel and her video down below. As of filming this, it is early November and I thought it would be appropriate to talk about some of the books that I'm hoping to get to before the end of the year. I'm currently in the midst of two different readathons for the month of November. I'm doing the Skoden Readathon, which is an Indigenous author readathon, as well as Nonfiction November. So all of the books that I will be talking about, save one in this video, are books that are not on those TBRs. But if you are interested in hearing about some of the books that I'm looking to read in the month of November, I will link those respective TBR videos in the notes. So without further ado, let's start with the first question, which is, are there any books that you started this year that you have yet to finish? And the answer is yes. I do have a tendency when I'm reading nonfiction to start a book, put it down, and get caught up in any number of fiction books. So there are currently two nonfiction books that I started this year that I have yet to get through. The first being I Thought It Was Just Me, But It Wasn't by Brene Brown, and the second being Another Mother Tongue, Gay Words, Gay Worlds by Judy Gran. The Brene Brown book is one that I picked up in November of last year, so it has been almost, or just about a full year since I picked that book up, and I think I'm only still 20 pages in. The problem for me with this book is I have started to read it and put it down a number of times, and there has been a long enough time span in between each of the times that I've picked it up that I feel like I have forgotten what was initially talked about. I am annotating that book and will likely write a few notes down in a journal that I think are really helpful. That's one of the ways that I help absorb information from nonfiction books, but I have not done that yet with that book. And really what has happened with that book is I am looking forward to reading it, but it has just fallen to the bottom of my currently reading pile, and I have been distracted by any number of fiction books this year. So I really just need to set out a large chunk of time to sit down and just push through the rest of the book. Brene Brown is an author that has been highly recommended to me by many people, and I am looking forward to getting into her work. I am still kind of new to the nonfiction self-help books, which is what I think in part is making me a little trepidatious about diving into this book. But I'm hoping to either make time for that book at the end of November or the beginning of December. The Judy Gran book, Another Mother Tongue, that I started reading, I think it was February of this year. I'm about 30% through that book, was one that I was quite excited to start, but am currently struggling with a little bit. The book itself is part memoir of Judy Gran's experience growing up a lesbian in the 1950s in the southwest of the US, as well as her analysis of various parts of gay culture and where she believes they came from. The aspect of this book that is really what is motivating me to get through is the fact that Judy Gran is dedicating this book to her first girlfriend, Vaughn, who was the one who quote-unquote brought her out. Vaughn has since passed away, and she is dedicating each chapter and the entire book to Vaughn. There are sections of each chapter that sort of read like a letter to her first girlfriend, talking about some of the experiences that they had, but also in a way it is somewhat of a one-sided conversation where Judy Gran is telling Vaughn about all of these things that she found out about the traditions that Vaughn passed on to her but didn't necessarily know where they came from. So Judy Gran has gone and looked into the origins of a lot of the traditions that she heard about via word of mouth in the 1950s and later on in the 60s and 70s. Things like where certain terms came from, where certain visual cues came from, like wearing a small ring on your pinky finger or your thumb to indicate that you were a lesbian, why there is such a strong association with the color lavender and the queer community. The thing that I am struggling with this book, unfortunately, is the scholarship. I was a history major in college. I have been trained in historical research and scholarship, and Judy Gran's scholarship and research, just from what I have read, leaves a lot to be desired in my opinion. There have been things that she has brought up in this book that I know for a fact are historically incorrect. So for me, from a historical scholarly perspective, this is difficult to get through because I'm often making comments in the margins with my pen of this is incorrect, or wondering what kind of sources she is using for the research that she is doing. I'm getting better about knowing when to DNF a read. However, I don't feel like I'm at that point yet with this book, and I think what I might just do is skim through the analysis portions and just read the biographical autobiography aspects that are in this book with Graham writing to her first girlfriend, and that might be just how I get through it. I do love the idea of this book. I love the thought process behind it. However, it's the execution and the scholarship that is what is sort of holding me back from finally finishing it. Okay, next question. Do you have an autumnal book to transition you into the end of the year? And the answer is yes. I have two that I think that I would really like to get to. The autumn is when I feel really drawn to historical fiction, namely historical fiction that feels a little bit more moody, a little bit darker. The first pick for this question being Fingersmiths by Sarah Waters. This is one of the Sarah Waters on my shelf that I haven't read, and I think it is probably the most critically acclaimed of her books so far. It's also what inspired the Korean film The Handmaiden that came out several years ago, I think at this point, that was very well received. But for me, autumn and winter is definitely a time where I feel drawn to Sarah Waters' writing and the types of stories that she tends to tell. So I'm looking forward to what I think is going to be a very gothic, very spooky, very mysterious lesbian historical romance. So looking forward to that one. The second historical fiction book that I am hoping to get to by the end of the year is The Mermaid and Mrs. Hancock by Imogen Gower. This is a historical fiction book that has been on my shelves for several years at this point, and I really just want to read it and see what I think about it. I do know that it is set in the 1780s, which is a time period that I'm not as familiar with. It's not usually the area of historical fiction that I read, but I am nonetheless intrigued. And I have heard that the writing is very beautiful, as well as there are elements of magical realism in it, which pique my interest, especially for the autumn season. The third question is there a new release that you are still waiting for? And the answer is no, not for the end of this year. I'm not generally someone who follows new releases unless it's an author that I am really a big fan of, or a series that I'm following. The one new release that is chomping at the bit in the back of my brain is the Electo the Ninth release, which is happening in September of 2023, but that is a full year away. So the fourth question is, do you have any books that you want to get to before the end of the year? The answer is yes. I have 4 books outside of the TBRs that I made for November that I would really like to get to before the end of the year. The first being one of the Olivia Lang books that I have acquired. I'm not sure which one I want to pick yet, but I'm definitely in the mood for some creative nonfiction essays, and there are 3 Olivia Lang books that I have collected, and I think I will pick one of them and will hopefully enjoy it. Next, I would really like to get to This Side of Paradise by F. Scott Fitzgerald. I have a number of his books on my shelf, and I've really been meaning to get to them for a number of years, but I think for me it's knowing that there are a finite number of them, and the ones that I have read and some of his short stories that I've read I have really enjoyed. I have a complicated relationship with F. Scott Fitzgerald. The books that I have read by him are some of my favorites. However, knowing more about his life, knowing more about his ideologies and principles, the YouTuber Kazro made a very interesting and in-depth look at F. Scott Fitzgerald and his life. I will link it in the cards if you are interested to know a little bit more about what I'm referencing. Nevertheless, I am looking forward to getting through the books of his that I do own and hoping that I will enjoy them, while also definitely reading them with a critical lens. The next book that I would like to get to is The Water Statues by Fleur Jaggery. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that. I believe it is translated from Italian. This book is one that is very, very short. I believe it is under 100 pages, and it's one that I bought this past year that I have wanted to get to. I have heard that it is a book that is very surreal and written almost in the style of a play while still being a novel, and it deals with the theme of loneliness and the emotional poverty that often accompanies large amounts of wealth, which definitely intrigues me, but I will also not lie and not tell you that I was definitely pulled in by the beautiful cover art on this one. But it is one that I would really like to get to by the end of this year, seeing as it is so short and seeing that I purchased it in the last year. It's something that I am trying to be better about. And the last book that I'm hoping to get to by the end of the year is The Hours by Michael Cunningham. I read, or rather I listened to the audiobook of Mrs. Dalloway by Virginia Woolf this year, and The Hours is reportedly a book that is very heavily inspired by Mrs. Dalloway. So I would like to read this book while I still have Mrs. Dalloway somewhat fresh in my mind. The next question is, are there any books that you think potentially could shock you and become one of your favorite books of the year? And I have 4 potential books that I think might be able to fit that category. The first one being The Immortal King Rao. I talked about this book in my autumn TBR, and I think just because it is very thematically aligned with 2 of the books that I have really enjoyed this year, the first being Blackfish City, the second being The High House. And both of those books were very much in the same vein of a speculative future that deals very heavily with the climate crisis and the repercussions of that. So I think thematically that book is potentially in the running for that reason. The next would be Fingersmiths by Sarah Waters. I really love Sarah Waters' writing, and knowing that this is one of her most highly acclaimed publications, I think that puts it potentially in the running to be a favorite of mine. The next are 2 books that I am reading for the Skoden Readathon that features Indigenous authors. The first being The Future Home of the Living God by Louise Edrich, which just the summary of this book sounds incredible, but just based on the summary it sounds very much like a speculative apocalypse book that deals very heavily with issues of reproductive rights, as well as the importance of cultural connection with Indigenous communities. And the other book, The Seakeeper, is one that a few people commented on my video saying that they really loved that book and they hoped I enjoyed it. So just hearing that several other people enjoyed that book as well, and just based on the summary, knowing that it deals with aspects of seed saving and ecology and passing down memory and tradition through a maternal lineage, all of that just sounds really lovely, and I've heard good things about it from other people that have commented. So I'm keeping my fingers crossed for that one for sure. And last but not least, the last question is, have you already started making reading plans for the next year? And the answer is yes, not necessarily super solid ones, but I'm definitely thinking about how I would like to approach my reading in the coming year. One of the things that I'm definitely thinking about is looking to whittle down my physical TBR of unread books on my shelf. Definitely utilizing my library a lot more for physical and audiobooks instead of going and buying physical books. I don't think I'm going to try to put any sort of book buying ban on myself, but definitely being more conscious about the number of books that I purchase versus the number that I am reading off of my shelf. Definitely going to try and make reading nonfiction books a larger priority in the coming year. About half of the bookcases that you see behind me are nonfiction, and unfortunately a good number of them are unread, so I would like to fix that. And then last but not least, there is sort of a larger ticket item on my reading plans for next year, and that is finishing a book that I started my senior year of high school back in 2012. So it has been 10 years in the reading, and that is the complete collection of Tales of Sherlock Holmes. Don't get me wrong, this is a book that I have really loved reading. However, the format of it being over 1,000 pages, it being very heavy, the typeset being very tiny and very close set, has in many ways deterred me from picking it up. At the moment, I'm currently halfway through the book, and I think I would like to make a project of finally finishing that book next year. So those are my answers for the end of the year book tag. If you're interested in doing this tag, please feel free, I will tag you. Let me know in the comments, are there any specific books that you are really looking forward to getting to by the end of the year? Do you have any reading plans that you've started to make for next year? Let me know, I would love to hear it. That is all from me, my friends. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a thumbs up, I hear that helps. And if you would like to see more from me, you can subscribe, and I would love to have you here. But that is all from me today. I hope you all are doing well, and I will see you in my next video.